Well, it's another Trumpapalooza. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, I just can't help myself. I watched CNN roll the tape on Donald Trump's impromptu news conference on the White House lawn. We did an episode about this some time ago, and it was just a marvel to behold. Today, again, with Marine One spun up and its engines roaring in the background, Donald Trump paced back and forth before the assembled press corps and answered questions. Of course, we couldn't hear the questions because of the sound of Marine One, but all the mics were on President Trump, so you could hear him. In the background, it looked like that there were a bunch of cadets from West Point or something. There were a bunch of guys in their gray dress uniforms standing back there. And let me just go over a few of the things that I heard in just a few minutes of this that I watched. I'm sure the reporters were continually asking him about impeachment, about the Ukraine phone call. But this is what he said, and he said it over and over again. Adam Shifty Schiff is a corrupt politician. I'll bet during the 5 minutes I watched that, he repeated Adam Shifty Schiff a couple of times and corrupt politician numerous times. Nancy Pelosi, also a corrupt politician, which in fact then made Adam Shifty Schiff a double corrupt politician. And let me just leave it at that. First of all, President George W. Bush was renowned for giving cute nicknames to people he enjoyed or whose company he enjoyed as kind of a term of endearment. President Trump has a quite different approach to these terms of endearment. What do you think of the President of the United States standing before the White House and Marine One and cadets from West Point calling the head of the Intelligence Committee, Shifty Schiff, calling the House Speaker, corrupt politician?
Well, I imagine if you're a cadet at West Point and you've agreed to sign on the dotted line and be sent in harm's way and perhaps die for your country at the order of the commander-in-chief, you might want to be serving under a guy who's not, at least not afraid to identify who the enemy is and what the problem is. Adam Schiff is a shifty politician. And this entire thing has been a witch hunt. And I've seen President Nixon was much, much younger, under siege, and Nixon was guilty. He wasn't guilty of anything spectacular in terms of today's standards, but certainly he was guilty of the cover-up and so on. And I saw him constantly walking back, and I saw him constantly releasing. We would see little bits of more and more damning evidence, and the thing just continued to climb. With Trump, it's pretty much a mirror image of that. Every time we get another big revelation, it turns out that it's less and less and less, and there was nothing really to begin with. So you have to ask yourself, what is it that this guy is doing, this Adam Schiff and all the rest of them? And so to call him a corrupt politician is not something that I think is going to cause the West Point cadets to faint. Now,
well, the West Point cadets probably couldn't hear him say that because of the roar of the helicopter. However,
well,
what I'm
sure
saying
they wouldn't
is,
have fainted even if he had.
What I'm saying is that they formed the backdrop for these remarks, and so there's this very iconic backdrop of cadets and the White House and Marine One and the President of the United States, by the way, also saying about corrupt politician Nancy Pelosi that she needs to go home and take care of her district, which is a disgusting mess. And things are, I wasn't clear exactly what he was saying here, but he said through the drainage system in San Francisco, things are flowing into the ocean that shouldn't be going into the ocean.
He's right. And this is why the left can't stand Donald Trump and why they hate him with such a burning passion, and why I suspect people like the West Point cadets, who may not have heard him at the time, but may have heard him in the remarks that were recorded for TV, why they probably love him. Certainly why most of the people I know in the military love them. He's a man who calls things as they are and says things that are true. And we have gone through such a period, really magnified under Obama, but it began well before that, where it was not politic to speak the truth. This is the entire idea of political incorrect. And so to hear somebody come out and actually speak the truth is revelatory, and it causes the press to pop their minds, because the thing that we just have to keep understanding, and I can't hit this point often enough, Scott, is that the power that the left has over this culture and over its citizens is power that we grant them. They don't have guns. They don't have the votes. They have to import people to get the votes, and they impose their mean-spirited, narrow philosophy on people by social pressure, by the idea of saying, well, if you disagree with me, it's obviously because you're a racist, and people shut up because they're not. Donald Trump is immune to this. And because he's immune to this, they have no power over him. None. They don't even have the power to suppress him. And that scares the living daylights out of these people, scares them to death. But I would like to talk for a minute about the nicknames. I just recorded something for our friends over at Newsmax on it's called Trump at War. It'll be coming out shortly. And the first episode is about Trump during the primaries. And so having just recorded that, I realized that that Donald Trump during the primaries referred to Jeb as low energy Jeb. And it stuck. And then he called Marco Rubio Little Marco. And that stuck. And then he called Ted Cruz Lion Ted. And that stuck. Now I'm a Ted Cruz supporter. I like Ted Cruz very much. But the point is...
And Crooked Hillary, of course.
Well, yeah, Crooked Hillary is the all-time classic. But the point is that Donald Trump has a special genius for understanding what the perceived negatives of his opponent is, and then going straight at that without any window dressing and just plain calling it out. And that's genius. And I'm late to the party on patting myself on the back about this, but in 2012, about 3 days after the election, I gave a speech where I said the next president of the United States is going to be a Republican, and he's going to come from the pop culture. And the reason I said that was because it was clear to me by the loss of Romney in 2012, like I said, it was 3 days after the election when I said this, that Romney had so badly mismanaged his own image. So bad, well, as it turns out, maybe not so badly, but in any event, as a Republican candidate, so badly handled his image that what could have been a win was turned into a defeat. And I knew at the time that whoever was going to come out of the Republican ranks was going to be the only person who would come from the pop culture, and who, I didn't pick him by name, but he would be somebody who understood the media, understood how they worked, understood the lies they tell, and most importantly, understood that the outrage that certain things will cause among the press will cause the press to report on them 24 hours a day. And Donald Trump just surfs this free airtime. And he did it brilliantly. And one of the things that he did it brilliantly by was the ability to call his opponents nicknames that sound like their childhood kindergarten nicknames.
I couldn't help, Bill, when I was watching this, but think that in President Trump's head, as he was pacing back and forth upon these media people and kind of picking different ones out of the crowd and answering their questions, you know, they're all shouting at the same time. And I couldn't help but think that in his head, he was sort of taunting them, going, go ahead, ask me another question, because I want to say Adam Shifty Schiff, corrupt politician again.
This is why he's president. This is why I think he has a superb chance of becoming reelected. And let me go to the larger issue here, because some of this may seem accidental to some people. People who've watched Trump for a long time realize this is all planned, and it is. But let's just stop for a second and take a look at the setting. The amount of time it takes to spin up Marine One is probably 60 seconds to 2 minutes. He was
getting ready to board it so he could go
well,
to
it doesn't
Georgia
matter.
for a
It doesn't
rally.
matter. Doesn't matter. This is my entire point. It's not like President Trump could not have done this press conference, this impromptu press conference, without the helicopter drowning everything out. It's certainly simple for him to do. It wouldn't have delayed him by any time whatsoever. Once Trump turns away from the microphone and starts walking to Marine One, they fire up the turbines, engage the rotors, and he's off in the same amount of time he would have been otherwise. But that's not what happened. And this is the critical point that you have to understand if you're a Donald Trump supporter, and I certainly have become even more of one than I was in 2016. That is stagecraft. That's stagecraft. It's nothing else. It's not politics. It's certainly not dictated by the president's schedule or national security or anything. This is a master of stagecraft and appearance, doing what he does best. In other words, what does that picture paint for you? If he were to walk out there and Marine One were to be stationary, just basically idling or not even with the engines fired up. And Donald Trump walks out, then he's going to be jumped on by a pack of wolves. They're all going to be shouting over him. He's going to be struggling to fight and so on. And he's going to be at a disadvantage. But if you flip this and you have this gigantic twin rotor Sikorsky in the background, just flap in the air, what does it actually accomplish in terms of how that press conference is perceived? The first thing it does is it says this is an important man and he doesn't have time to take a whole bunch of questions today because his helicopter is burning fuel in the background. That's very, very important. You may not have our friend, guys at Red Letter Media, who I like very much, uses this term all the time. He said, you may not have noticed it, but your brain did. And so immediately, Donald Trump has put the press corps at the disadvantage because now Donald Trump, whether they know it or not, is controlling the time. I've got a helicopter back there. It's burning fuel. I don't have all day to waste with you people. See, I'm president of the United States and there's my helicopter. I can't be here all day. That alone is genius. But even more so, is now just think about this because I'm trying to get people to understand that these things are not accidental on the part of Donald Trump, that this is the genius of Trump, his showmanship and his genius. By having that helicopter out there, basically at full power, just ready to go, he is making the reporters shout because Donald Trump can't hear them. So who's in the position of power now? If he had gone out there in silence, he would have been outnumbered 30-1 or 50-1. He'd be in the spotlight. He'd be in the crossfire and they'd be launching their attacks on him and he'd have to just defend himself. But with that helicopter out there making that incredible visual and making that incredible noise, he can come out like the Lord of the universe and say, I don't have much time. My helicopter is running. I'll take a few questions. What do you think about the What? I can't hear you. I can't hear you because I'm the commander in chief and my helicopter is waiting and I've got work to do. See how it works? It's utterly, utterly brilliant. And I don't think any part of it is accidental. I think he absolutely. Look, people have criticized Donald Trump about a number of things. We've had talks about decorum issues and some of the things that I've had a bit of a problem with in terms of decorum. And sometimes there's an argument that Donald Trump is really playing four-dimensional chess and he can never make a mistake. I don't think I believe that. But this is Donald Trump at his absolute most genius. He is a showman. He is not a real estate developer as much as he is a showman. There are thousands of millionaire and billionaire real estate developers in this country, and there's only one Donald Trump. Donald Trump is as close as we can get to P.T. Barnum, and I mean that in the best possible way. The critics will say that Barnum sold bunk, that his mermaid wasn't a real mermaid, and they'd be right about that. But Barnum understood that people aren't going for a scientific exhibition. They're going to see a mermaid and tell their kids about it. And he understands the showmanship. And if you think that this is manipulation, then I would simply refer you back to the previous president who informed us that he had, despite the fact that he'd attended Reverend Wright's church for 1,000 Sundays, never heard a single word of anything that was anti-white or anything like that or socialist. And when he made that announcement, Barack Obama looked like he was standing at a flag factory. He had 45 American flags behind him in a row. When Barack Obama appears on television, he was the first one that I saw that did this. I pointed this out 10 years ago in a afterburner called iconography. When he appears on stage, Obama was the first person to understand that if I'm up on a stage and there's nothing behind me but a curtain or a wall, then the audience watching on television has no idea how to react. So Obama used an audience that he would put behind him, and they functioned kind of as the same way as the laugh track used to function in a 60s sitcom. And in I Dream of Jeannie, it would tell you when to laugh. So when Obama would say something that the leftists like, the people behind him would burst into applause. They're all smiling. They're all happy. And they're sending you the signal. They're sending you the social proof signal, the peer pressure that everybody likes this guy. Just look, everybody loves him. What he's saying about free healthcare. Everybody's nodding and everybody's applauding. Oh, wonderful. He's smart enough, Obama, smart enough to say that the people behind him, which are the only people you see, by the way, not only agree with me, but they agree with me enthusiastically. Therefore, you should as well, or else there's something wrong with you. And Donald Trump has this ability to manage the stage. And if he didn't, not only would he not be president, but we would be almost 3 years into the corruption of Hillary Clinton, and I think the irreversible damage done to agencies like the CIA and the FBI, which were catastrophically damaged by 8 years under Obama, but what would have been put through the ground with a stake in its heart if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016.
Bill, we drew another Republican president from the pop culture.
Yes,
and
we did.
And frankly, as I recall it, it was really the first time that I heard a lot of talk in the media about this idea of stagecraft and how the president was positioning himself in a way that was made for television. But what occurs to me, Bill, in contrasting and comparing Ronald Reagan with Donald Trump is, at the time when Reagan was president, I was not a fan. I was on the other side of the aisle.
I was too. I was too young to have had any sense beaten into me yet.
And I remember watching him, and every time I read about him in the New York Times, I became further enraged at his administration. And every time I saw him on TV, I thought to myself, well, I'd like to have a beer with that guy. And I think that President Reagan, coming from the same political party, coming from the same entertainment background, somehow managed to do his stagecraft in a way that engendered affection from his opponents. Whereas when President Trump does this, it seems to me that he is not only that he may engender antagonism, but that he's frankly taunting the other side to look at him and say, how did we get that jackass in the White House?
Well, between the election of Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, to say that the situation in the world and that the audience that the stage is being set for has changed is to understate it by a couple of order of magnitude. There were no internal deep state agents who were determined to prevent Ronald Reagan's presidency. Ronald Reagan wasn't immediately attacked by the press over something that had no foundation whatsoever. And since the previous administration under Jimmy Carter was incompetent, but at least it wasn't as politically corrupt as Obama, there was still a Justice Department and all the rest. Ronald Reagan could afford to be amiable because he lived in a much more civilized time. There was still some degree of decorum.
That's the key to this question, Bill. I'm wondering, have we changed? Because at the time, he was winning friends and influencing people by his approach in the 1980s. At this time, it seems like President Trump has taken an analysis or a read of the American public and said, that's not the guy they want. They want the SOB.
They don't want the SOB, Scott. He's not saying, oh, they want the son of a bitch. What they're saying is, what Trump is saying to himself is that the American people, certainly since the last term of Ronald Reagan, probably more likely starting in early Clinton administration, the American people have been told over those intervening decades that certain things that you know are true are not true. And if you believe them or say them out loud, then you're a racist and you deserve to be shunned and ruined and canceled and all the rest. And this line has continued and accelerated as time has gone by. So Ronald Reagan could afford to be amiable because amiability still worked in those days. And let's go a little further with this, because there's some interesting parallels, very interesting parallels between Reagan and Trump. So let's take a look for a second at the image of the president as Ronald Reagan and Trump's image as president, both of which were created by master showmen, in my opinion. Ronald Reagan came to the White House after coming from a movie career where he played lifeguards, he played the Gipper. He was already known to be a hero, a person who saved people's lives, a leading man, a bold man of decision. He was the kind of guy who was a leading man. If you're a leading man in the 40s and 50s in movies, you are a strong, tough guy. And at the same time, the kind of guy who, like you said, you'd want to have a beer with. So Ronald Reagan came to the White House prepackaged. When Ronald Reagan ran for office, you knew, unlike Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, you knew who Ronald Reagan was. You'd seen him in movies and you'd watched him. And if anyone had not seen, was it the Newt Rockney story, the one where he played the Gipper? If no one had seen that, then rather, if you had seen it, then how could you not like him? So he
and
came.
I might add, Bill, that Ronald Reagan actually had been a lifeguard and actually had saved people's lives, not just in movies.
Precisely correct. And here is the most important distinction, similarity between Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan and Scott Ott and Bill Whittle. This is something that all four of us share. Ronald Reagan started out as a Democrat, and Donald Trump certainly was far more sympathetic to Democratic principles during his formative years rising than he was to Republican ones. And you and I both have confessed in the past, although we haven't been forced to confess, that's the difference between our side and so on, that we were still too young to have the stupid beaten out of us yet. But basically, all four of us have been inside the liberal camp, not only understood how it thought, but thought that way as well, and realized that the world is not what they're selling us. And I think all four of us, not to continually glorify our situation, although certainly that'd be a fun thing to do for at least an episode, all four of us realized what Ronald Reagan realized and put into words so succinctly. He said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. And the Democratic Party today is on a rocket ship to a black hole. And nobody wants to go there. So what Ronald Reagan could package himself in such a way that still could sell. Now, if Donald Trump, I understand that Donald Trump doesn't have the character for this because if the environment that Ronald Reagan had as when he was elected still existed today, we would get somebody amicable and nice and friendly, maybe somebody who looked a lot like Mitt Romney, although was it Donald Trump Jr. who was asked who his favorite Democrat is, and he said Mitt Romney? I think that's just brilliant. So if the situation, the social culture had been more or less the way that it was in the 1980s, then we would have had an opportunity to elect somebody who really was very presentable and spoke very well and was great at reading a speech, was great at performing as president. I got a chance to interview Peter Robinson in depth, talking about the Cold War. He's the guy who wrote the Mr. Gorbachev Tear Down This Wall speech. And he said Reagan understood exactly what he wanted. He wasn't a puppet, but he understood exactly what he wanted. And then he wanted a screenwriter to write for him in moving words what he actually believed. And that's the perfect balance between a president and a screenwriter. So now let's go to Donald Trump. If Donald Trump had been a nice guy, Donald Trump would have been blown out of the water. He wouldn't even have gotten on the stage. If Donald Trump had been a nice guy, a go-along guy, the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with, then you never would have heard of Donald Trump as a real estate developer or as a presidential candidate. Donald Trump is the product of 20 years of ever-increasing media corruption, where CNN is handing debate questions in advance to his opponent. And he is fighting the kind of headwind now and the kind of corruption, not only of the corruption of the government, but the corruption of the news media. He's fighting the kind of corruption that he understands and the American people understand that there is no nice way out of this. There is no nice way out of this. This is like fighting the Japanese in the Pacific. You go and you shoot a Japanese soldier and he's wounded. You go over to give him aid like any decent person would, find out he's holding a grenade. Next thing you know, three medical corpsmen are gone. So it's different rules, different combat, different warfare, and he is playing by different rules. And I think if you consider the culture war to be the actual battle, and this is the only reason why I'm here, then what you find is that Ronald Reagan, although he won the Cold War, I'm not trying to portray him as a softie by any means, but Ronald Reagan could afford to be a peacetime president in terms of his image. Nice guy, amicable guy, kind of guy you'd want to sit down and have a beer with. By the time we get to the 2016 election, the country has been so corrupted, it has been so undermined and so one-sided. The headwind that a Republican candidate is sailing into is at least 30 points at the polls. At least. Now, you can't afford to be, let me pick a better example. Now you can't afford to be, for God's sake, what's his name? Now you can't afford to be Omar Bradley. You can't afford to be the soldier's general. You can't afford to be the guy who looks after his troops. You can't afford to be the nice guy. Now you've got to be George Patton. Now, in order to win this battle, you've got to be the kind of guy who's willing to come out and say, no one ever won a war by dying for his country. You won a war by making the other poor son of a bitch die for his country. We're going to go through them like crap through a goose. We're going to grease the tank treads with their guts. That's what's needed when you are at this level of combat. And Donald Trump is a war president, and that's why he's effective. And that's why the left hates him, because he is the only war president that we have had or ever likely could have had who understands what the actual war is, who understands that the war is not a war about ideas and policies. It's a war about images. Everything we learn comes through pictures. A picture's worth 1,000 words. If there's 30 frames a second in a video, then that's 30,000 words a second, right? So he understands this. And since this is the battlefield that the actual hearts and minds are being fought on, we finally have a war president who understands that in order to win this war, you have to do two things. You have to frame your appearances, not them. They don't frame your appearances. They don't get to decide how you look. You have to make the decision on how you look. You have to set the picture frame around this. And the difference between an idling helicopter and a shut down helicopter is enormous. So he understands that. And that alone is what makes him as effective as he is. And the second thing that Donald Trump understands is that what the people of America are looking for is not a means SOB. That's not what Donald Trump was elected for. They will take anybody who speaks the truth. But speaking the truth today, with the power of social media, the magnifying power of social media and peer pressure and so on, the only people that can speak the truth today are mean SOBs with skin like rhinoceroses. Maybe, let me rephrase that. Maybe it's not that Donald Trump has a thick skin. I suspect he has a rather thin one, as I do. But he is willing to fight back, and he is willing to give as much as he took and then some more. And that is why he has been as successful as he has been, and why he generates such fanatical support among people who, if they were to run into Donald Trump at a cocktail party in 1990, let's say, would have found him utterly repulsive. They don't care. They don't care about his past. They don't care. We don't care about his past. We don't care about him dating porn stars. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is this is a fighting general. He says he's going to Berlin. He's going to shoot that paper-hanging son of a bitch himself. And that's what we need, and that's what we got. And I can't spare this man. He fights.
The folks over at the Patriot Post have been introducing people to Bill Whittle's videos for a long time, and recently we decided to help return the favor, and so they're promoting the things we do and we're promoting the things they do. You can find a link to the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, in the description below. We encourage you to check that out. We think you'll really enjoy it. And of course, we are forever grateful to the members at BillWhittle.com who actually fund the productions of these programs. 5 a week for Bill Whittle Now, 5 a week for Right Angle with Stephen Green and Bill and I, and a lot of other programs that you can find at BillWhittle.com. If you're watching this on video or listening to us in your podcast listening app, we're grateful for the time you spent with us. If you're on YouTube, make sure you're a subscriber to this channel and click that little notification. We call it the Liberty Bell. Ring that Liberty Bell to make sure that you are notified when we post a new video. We've had some concern frankly, forever, that the people who want to hear our material aren't always getting to hear our material, whether through Facebook or other social media, including YouTube. So take that proactive effort to make sure that they're notifying you. And if you don't hear from them, just go directly to the source. Go to BillWhittle.com and become a member. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.